our debt service is about $900 million.
In November last year, Bank of Uganda's Deputy Governor, Michael Ating Ego, while appearing before Parliament's Committee on Finance, revealed that Uganda's public debt now stands at 80 trillion shillings.
You must consider biasing your expenditures towards growth-enhancing activities.
External debt stands at 47 trillion shillings, while domestic debt stands at 33 trillion shillings. With our debt service to revenue collection ratio standing at 30%, this means that for every shilling collected as tax, 30 cents goes to debt repayment. With an ever-dwindling window of external creditors willing to lend government money, government is now increasingly borrowing from the domestic market, like from banks and the National Social Security Fund, or NSSF, to finance its huge infrastructure development plan.
NSSF, now we have told you, is a solid fund. Why should I go and borrow from abroad when there is money here?
However, in an earlier interview, Ramadhan Gobi, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, had indicated that NSSF was not an option when it comes to government borrowing domestically.
Government yewola sente okuva mu banks eziri international. Netumala netwewola okuva mu mabanka gaffe agali wano. Naye ffe tetugenda nti ugenze mu kitongole kino nalabyeko ebintu naye ekyo si kituufu. Ugamba bakola business nga bwe bakola endala naye nga si kyakola government.
Dr. Enoch Trinorio, an economic analyst, says government borrowing large sums of money domestically will push the private sector out of business because government bonds usually have high interest rates.
The interest rate structure for domestic debt is in double digits. Now, this is over and above, the rate at which the economy is growing, and usually in sustainability discussion, your level of earning should be able to meet that level of interest.
That also affects the private borrowers across all the board. Now you're no longer only talking about NSSF money, because it means even if Stanbic mobilized its own money from its group, Standard Bank in South Africa and wherever, it would have to charge a higher rate because the government borrowing has increased the rate.
Development economist Dr. Fred Muhumuza says government's appetite for domestic borrowing needs to be curbed because it's driving up the cost of doing business in the country.
Because the Ugandan financial sector is shallow. It's not that deep. Now, where it is shallow and government is a giant guzzle of resources, it's like now an elephant is drinking together with the squirrels. Because you get a final loss of, I have borrowed to build a road, but the road is for who? It's for the private sector. But the same private sector now can no longer borrow from the banks to go and do what they need to do to utilize the road. You both lose.
He adds that because lending to government brings in high returns per year, this is crippling the private sector.
If government is assuring me 18%, and they are saying if it's 20 years, there will be no tax, you already have made a decision for the private sector to say, don't set up a factory, don't set up a hotel, don't bother farming, lend to government. Now that is already a switch of killing the very private sector.
The biggest taxpayer is the private sector. And if you're making any investments, you should be looking at accelerating private sector growth. Now, the challenges of crowding out is that you're also crowding out the space for potential future revenue streams.
In the National Budget Framework Paper for the financial year 2023-2024, about 6 trillion shillings has been set aside for interest payments and commitment fees, while 8 trillion will be borrowed to pay off some debts. However, agro-industrialization has been allocated 1.4 trillion shillings. Manufacturing has been allocated 268.4 billion shillings. Tourism development has been allocated 89.2 billion, while private sector development has been allocated 1.7 trillion shillings.
I'm worried that we will get to a level where even taxes would not be able to meet the obligation of debt and the ongoing requirement of basic services. And we seem to have reached that level when I begin to hear we are paying debt out of borrowing.
Our fiscal deficit has been widening because we took on large infrastructure projects, some of which were planned and others were not planned. Over and beyond that, in the next financial year, government still plans to borrow a sizable share of issued treasury bills and bonds.
Economists call for the rethinking of how NSSF funds can be developed to give long-term benefits for the rest of the economy to hang on.
So that's why we have advised government that if you are going to contract any commercial loans, they should have a grace period of 4 years, because we don't want anything to mature within 4 years, since we are already laden with a $900 million debt service payment in the next 4 years.
The risk of government increasingly borrowing from the domestic market is that at a certain point in the future, government will have to raise taxes and also limit spending on service provision in order to reduce its debt levels. Gillian Nantume, NTV Tonight.